Thank you so much, Tara, for organizing this workshop. And it's going to be a kind of a very quick workshop, hopefully to keep the ball rolling and hopefully to start the conversation on publication and to form some groups and start kind of working together. So I know that not everybody was able to join us, so some colleagues and some of our PhD students will be just watching this video later and hopefully kind of joining us for the next workshop later. So I can't actually,
Sorry, it probably has to try it now.
okay.
Yeah.
Perfect. So this is just a general outline that we have, the book. In the first 20 minutes, I'll talk about the book publication, and then Tim Mitchell from Intellect Publishers will be actually address your questions about how to publish a book, and then we'll have a quick conversation on journal paper publication, and then we'll have a quick kind of workshop on publishing journal papers, and then I can't change it again. So I think anytime that we click that one.
Anytime I click something, yeah, sorry about that.
Sorry.
I'm trying to
Okay, so the first tip in publishing a book is to find the right topic, right? And I always remind myself that publishing a good book is first coming up with a topic that has to do with my strength and filling a gap in scholarship, right? And also, I mean, when I look at all books that I have published, they all started from curiosity and you know, a question that came up in my mind when I visited a city or I was teaching a class. So I think it's all about passion. If you feel kind of obligated about something, you are not gonna do it well. The other thing, the second tip is that it's gonna take 4 to 5 years to write and publish a good book. So be patient, Georgian. The third one is that choose the right category. So the general impression when it comes to books is that there is only one category of books, which is, you know, scholarly volumes. While there is a wide range of volumes, ask Cindy, she knows better. She deals with all types of them. So there are monographs, textbooks, edited volumes, critical editions, projects, exhibition catalogs, commentaries, translations, and all types of books. See what you want to publish, what is a good fit for you. And obviously, I want to admit here that if you are going for tenure, if you are, waiting for promotion, not all of these kinds of books carry the same weight when it comes to tenure and promotion. However, again, there's a lot of kind of diversity, which I think is really amazing. The other thing is define the audience of your book. And I think the audience is really important. I mean, whether it's general audience, academic audience, professional audience, interdisciplinary audience, and students. For example, I mean, when you submit a book proposal to a publisher, they always ask you to define the audience, right? And I mean, the first time that I submitted my first book proposal, I thought, okay, so this is just a question that I should answer. But then after publishing my first book, I started kind of thinking more about that question, because that defines my vision, whether I want my book to be read by sociologists, urban historians, or architects. That's why in each of my book projects, I have tried to define the type of audience that I want to deal with. And it's quite interesting that now I see the results of my efforts in my book reviews, because, for example, one of the books that I published was, and I don't have it here, is on Gardens of Renaissance. And because actually one of my target audience was Renaissance studies, the book actually ended up being in lots of journals that had to do with early modern studies and Renaissance studies. mainly because I targeted that kind of audience. It was not random. So that's why think about your audience and enjoy it. And that is also a unique experience, unique chance for you to enjoy learning about their language, because their language most probably is going to be different from your language. For example, the epidemic urbanism volume that I did with Intellect, and Mitchell, Tim actually worked with me on this volume. I specifically, when we started having conversation with Tim, with Intellect, we said, Caitlin, my co-editor, and myself, we said, we want it to be published in a way that is open to the general audience, people who can just put it on their table and just read it. And we don't want to use a super scholarly language that is not accessible to non-scholarly, non-academic audience. The other thing is that be creative, define your format, design your format. I think this is the fun part of publishing a book. Again, when I started publishing books, I had this very rigid understanding of writing a book and editing a book. But then that kind of gradually changed. And that's why, for example, in epidemic urbanism, for the first time, we defined this very specific format, which is 2,500 words for each chapter. So this is an edited volume. This format did not exist before, at least in similar volumes. And I can tell you that it was way more challenging than 5,000 word format that is very dominant in architectural history and urban history volumes. So in other words, even though it may sound easier to write a shorter chapter, it's more challenging. But the result was very rewarding, because it made it more kind of accessible to people who don't have the bandwidth to spend so much time reading kind of long chapter, lots of jargon, lots of, with lots of kind of difficult words, complicated terminologies. And the book proposal, take it seriously. There is a reason that publishers ask you to spend time to fill out the book proposal. And again, over the time, I have started taking the book proposals more seriously, because it tells you, it's an opportunity for yourself to define your vision for the book project that you are planning to work on. Forget about the publisher. So, and remember, a decent book starts with a good table of content, right? And the table of content is the most fun part of writing a book and editing a book, or publishing any kind of book. A few weeks ago, we had a conversation with Georgianne, who started working on her own book project. And I said, let's start from your table of content. Why is the outline important? Because the outline tells us about your vision, right? The structure of the volume. What do you want to discuss in your work? And the outline is very simple. You are just telling us what 5, 6, 7, 8 sections that you are going to have in this volume, and about the word limit, the word count that you are going to have in each section of your book. But that's really crucial. And just changing that outline is going to make a huge impact on the final result. Find the right publisher. So recently, one of our colleagues said that, oh, I came up with this publisher. They said, we want to publish your second book. I said, don't do it. Not that they are not good, but you already published one book with them. So try to find a more credible publisher for your second volume. So I know it takes time, but again, finding the right publisher is really important, because it depends on so many things. So academic credibility is one thing, a peer review process is one thing. So you may feel that if you go with a publisher that does not review your stuff, no, that's not a good sign. You don't want to do that. You want to work with a publisher that has a very strict peer review process. Why? Because I can tell you something that I have learned so much from anyone who has reviewed my book projects, and I really owe so much to them, every one of them, even the nastiest reviews that I have received from my colleagues out there, because they have done a lot, they have contributed a lot to my growth as an educator. So, sorry, I'm being very blunt and honest here. The timeline is also important. For example, the epidemic urbanism volume, we had two choices, and I know Tim is here, so I'm not supposed to say this, but a very credible university publisher was there, but they said we want to publish it in 4 years. But we said this book is all about epidemics, and we want to publish it while the topic of pandemic is relevant, and while people are still dealing with COVID. So that's why between these two publishers, we decided to proceed with Intellect, which I think is an amazing and very creative publisher. So that's why I think the issue of timeline is also matter, because there are some publishers that may put you on a wait list, and they may publish your work in 5, 6, 7 years, while others that may kind of accelerate the whole process. Publication quality is really important, and you should take it seriously. You should take a look at some sample publications and consult with other authors. So almost anytime I want to work with new publishers that I have not published with them before, I talk to other colleagues who have published with them to see what they have been their experience. And check out their marketing plan, because I can tell you something, the work does not end when you publish a book. You are just done with 50% of the project, right? 50% starts when the book is out. So if the publisher does not care about selling your book, that's really bad sign, because you want them to be very aggressive in marketing your book and selling it out there, right? This is all your hard work to be seen and to be promoted out there. So make sure that they have a very aggressive marketing plan. So share your manuscript with colleagues before submission. So this part is really important. Almost every single time that, most of the times that I have published my work, even if there are journal papers or books, I ask my colleagues to do me a favor and review the work. And I know that it takes a lot of time, but I try to do the same thing for my colleagues as well. So this is really important. There's a reason that we are all in academia, and it's really important to get that initial feedback from our colleagues and be open to this feedback. Secure funding for potential expenses. So this is really important. It's quite expensive to publish a book, and you should be ready. So there are some expenses involved, like, for example, copy editing, indexing, purchasing images, publishing color images, as I mentioned, purchasing images. So you need to be ready. Almost for every single book that I have published, I have raised funds. I can tell you that this is slightly frustrating, but it's doable. It's totally doable. I have done it more than 13 times, and it's doable. So now, anytime that I'm publishing a book, I know that it's part of my plan to raise funds and come up with an application and find the right venues. And also remember that it also helps your marketing plan. If a famous foundation is giving you a grant to support your publication, then you can say, for example, Landscape Foundation supported this publication. So it's also very prestigious for your publication. By the way, when it comes to providing funding for index, some may say, oh, index, I mean, save money, you don't need an index. I'm sure that Cindy is going to tell you, no, never do that. I have 2 book series, and I always tell my authors that never do that. Never save on index. Index, I mean, it just costs you about $600 to $1,000 of money. And by the way, I do have the best indexer in the world that can work with you, and it's the best thing that you can do. Why? Because if you have a good index, that's going to increase the searchability of your volume, citations. People are going to be able to use your book, right? So you need a good copy editor and indexer, right? So no matter how good you are as an editor, you need someone to take a look at the final draft and be organized and patient. So keep different drafts of your book, of the manuscript, and just be patient. Pay close attention to the images. So the good news is that we are all kind of architects, so we deal with images, but images are really important. But you would be surprised that I have dealt with so many architects who published in our journal who were not very organized with images. So images really matter, and believe me that I have also realized that articles and books that have more kind of attractive, appealing images tend to be more read and cited by reviewers and readers. So take them more seriously. So the good news is that once your book is out, then you need to have your marketing plan. What's your marketing plan? Book reviews. So you need to share a list of journals that can review your book. Invited lectures. So sometimes people, I should confess that I'm not the best when it comes to kind of reaching out to others and organizing these things, but it's good to be proactive and reach out to people, organizations who are willing and are interested in giving you a chance to present your work. Social media posts are important. Otherwise, who knows, just for example, that Lindsay just recently published this book on this topic, right? Work with the publisher's marketing team. And I fully realize that by the time that you get a hard copy of your book, you are super exhausted. You don't want to even look at it, that you don't want to even think about anything else. So you are completely done. But unfortunately or fortunately, your work starts at that point. So you need to have a marketing plan. And enjoy the ride and learn from the book reviews. Again, I think the most rewarding experience, personal experience for me, has been just learning from the book reviews, because it's not just learning, it's also about sometimes you write something and then you also see how your words are being read by and understood by a sociologist, by an urban historian, by an architect in Indonesia. So it's just these kinds of different understandings in different continents could be also part of this learning experience. So any questions, any general observations now? Sorry, I was a little bit fast.
No, it's good.
Tim, I hope you have an audio now. Your audio.
Yeah. There's a problem with my headphones, so I've just abandoned them.
Excellent.
How are you doing?
So I'm fine. So first of all, I should introduce Tim. Tim is the director of, actually the manager of book publications at Intellect. And I have been actually working with Intellect. So they publish our journal. So I have been working with Intellect for 12 years, and Intellect is relatively a young publisher, but they are one of the most creative publishers in the business out there. And Tim himself is extremely creative. I have worked with many publishers, but among them, I thought Tim would be the best one to talk because he thinks outside the box. Go ahead.
Okay, well, thanks for that, Mohammed. Yeah, I mean, just to say, I would definitely agree with everything that Mohammed just said there. It's quite a strong list of advice in terms of publishing, and there were a lot of topics covered that could be expanded on. So I wasn't entirely sure what to present today, other than maybe just to go over some tips for a good book proposal, because one of my main jobs actually is just receiving ideas and proposals for our books program, and they come in various different forms, from emails sort of saying, I've got this idea for a book, would it work for your press, to fully formed proposals in an author questionnaire. And one of the things that that we will often do as a publisher is sort of in quite a sort of formal fashion, is to ask for an author questionnaire to be filled in, and it sounds like a sort of default response, but actually, and I think Mohammed sort of referred to this, it's an excellent exercise for all authors to get into the habit of creating a sort of a formal book proposal for their project, where they think through every possible facet of the book, right from the title right through the synopsis, obviously, and table of contents. That's the obvious stuff. But then, the marketing plan, the audience, and sort of how you plan to sort of take the book out into the world is almost just as important. We can get an idea from the content whether or not it sort of piques our interest, but we need to know whether or not we can collaborate with potential authors. And we get a good sense of that from the book proposal form. So it's definitely worth spending a bit of time on that. So I thought what I would do is just run through, I think that most most academic presses will have a very similar process. I know they have a very similar process, and very similar forms, to be honest. So what I would suggest, though, is that you do your research and you sort of personalize your proposal by filling in the correct author questionnaire for the correct publisher, but also make sure that you do your research and you are submitting to the right publishers in the first place. We get a lot of proposals which just simply aren't suitable for Intellect. And sometimes we're quite an interdisciplinary publisher, and many academic presses are. So there's definitely some gray area about what could be accepted. But do your research first. You might have gone to a conference and met someone from a press and had a conversation, and then you have that sort of backstory before you then submit a proposal, which often helps. To say a bit more about Intellect, obviously we work with Mohammed on the Islamic Architecture Journal, and we have done for many years. I collaborate on a series examining art and architecture in the Middle East with Mohammed, and that's going from strength to strength as well. We also publish in visual culture, in design, architecture, fashion, media and communication, film studies, music, cultural studies, and performing arts, and sort of every sort of subdiscipline that comes out of those general areas. I think that's sort of, but we are a relatively small press, and there'll be other bigger presses that you can consider for your work, obviously. One of the benefits of working with a smaller press like Intellect, again, as Mohammed intimated, is that we can work with you sort of perhaps a bit more closely. You might get more contact time with editors and with the press themselves. We pride ourselves on sort of providing sort of mentoring role to a certain extent to emerging scholars, and we do take very seriously PhD dissertations and revised masters, and working with emerging scholars in that sense. And that's often the best way to sort of develop emerging areas and new areas, which we're very keen on. So that's something that we do. And as a publisher, we would sort of believe that all good publishers should add value to your work, and we add value to what you do. And it's a collaboration, sort of 50-50 where we're working together on every facet of the book proposal and then the book itself. In terms of the book proposal, I was going to run through some of the things that I think I deal with every day, and it may sound obvious, but it could be useful to you when you come to fill in an author questionnaire for a particular publisher. I think the main thing, sort of to say generally about turning research into book publications, is that what makes a good dissertation or a good thesis is not necessarily what makes a successful book publication. And you need to turn your research project or your thesis into a commercially viable product. Book publishing as opposed to journals publisher, there's no buffer of the subscriptions for a particular journal and articles that might have a very niche focus. A book can have a niche focus, but we need to try to make it as sort of universal or commercially viable as possible, so that we can convince librarians and students and a wider readership each time to part with their money for your book rather than another book that might be available. And that's our job, to help you do that. And so all the information we're asking for at any stage is designed to try to make your book sort of as discoverable as possible. So it's all sort of, all the feedback that Mohammed talked about in terms of peer review, it's all useful stuff for you to get your book to the point where it is a sort of a product as well as being sort of a passion project on a particular topic. So, you know, we're not a university press. We haven't got a budget to subsidize books. So as Mohammed said again, we often ask for funding to sort of subsidize prices, or if it's going to be highly designed with color images or, you know, sort of things like that. So it's worth showing awareness of the economic sort of ramifications of publishing and just sort of be willing to have a conversation about that. It's absolutely not the most important thing, but it's worth being aware of that, I think. And in terms of the book proposal, I was going to say that once you've selected your publisher, you know, your affiliation, your author, you know, who you are, your CV is important. It's not, as I said, we work with emerging scholars, it's not the most important thing. But we do need to know your affiliation, obviously. It's often left out. We work with independent researchers as well. But it's important to know kind of what your background is and why you should be considered an expert on this particular topic at this time. And it could just be because you found an original area or topic to work on no one else has. The title, spend some time thinking about the title, because actually it's amazing how many book proposals come in with obscure or bizarre titles that have no relevance to the book content itself. Actually, it's just there, you know, it maybe sort of people are trying to be clever with it or too metaphorical or poetic. But I would bear in mind that if it's an academic book, really it sort of needs to say what it does, and we go for book description, you know, sort of describing the content as clearly as possible every time, because that's how the book's going to be found. So, and I think sort of when we get proposals that clearly demonstrate an understanding of that, it shows that you know kind of how academic publishing works. Subtitles are great, but bear in mind they can get split up from the title. So we often will say, you know, add a subtitle if the title needs further contextualization regionally or temporally or whatever it is, then of course add that, but try to get as many of the keywords into the main title as possible. We do actually also ask for keywords, and these will be tagged along with the book when it finally is published. But when I'm looking at a proposal, the keywords immediately will give me a sense of the topics and the areas and the artists and the thinkers or designers that you're covering before I even get to the synopsis. So it gives us an idea of whether it's a book for us and does it hit some of the sort of the hot topics that our commissioning editor is expecting to see in those areas or would like to see, and sort of, you know, some of those keywords really. The short synopsis is different from the detailed synopsis. You get a chance to basically describe your book in 50 to 75 words. I think most publishers will ask you to do this. And that's really your sales pitch for the book. You know, it's where you get to sort of really pique an editor's attention with your book in terms of what your theme's going to be, your original theme, the key terms, concepts, artist figures, and then maybe a geographical focus or a date range if that's relevant. We often use that to then write a book description or copy later, further down the line. So, a strong short synopsis is useful. Then you've got a chance to do your developed synopsis, and that should really be where you go to town on sort of, what the book is about, and, sort of, that's really when I'm reading a proposal, sort of where the character of you as a writer comes out, your sort of, your confidence and your authority over the subject matter. That's kind of where we get a chance to be persuaded that you know what you're talking about, and this is a really interesting area for us to take seriously. It will also be, something which if we send the book out the proposal out for review, there'll be enough there that a reviewer could then sort of make suggestions on how you could tweak the proposal further to sort of make it a publishable product. So start with the table of contents, again, as Mohammed said, very important, and then maybe half a page or a quarter of a page on each chapter, and really give us a sense of the logic of the book and how the argument of the book is going to sort of transpire. We often get proposals for collections which don't have any information about the chapters, so really they're just ideas rather than book proposals. So I think it's worth waiting until you're at a stage where you've really got the book sort of cohered in your own mind and the book structure, and then we'll give feedback on it if we think it should be different, and at that point we can have a conversation about the sort of the book content. If we think that it's interesting enough, but we could sort of say, well, actually, we've already got material like this, or material like that out there. Maybe you could tweak it in such a way that would fit this audience or that readership. We do get a good sense of the tone from your proposal, and do be aware of the tone of your writing, depending on who you're writing for. So the audience is going to be key. So who are you writing for? I mean, I think most sort of research turned into book monographs or collections will be pitched at postgraduates, and your peers and scholars, maybe upper undergraduates. But if the book does have appeal to a crossover audience, we think it does, or a student audience, then you might need to think about kind of how the manuscript is pitched as well, and the proposal accordingly. Be confident in your own ideas, because you're presenting it to us as the expert in the field, and you want to give the impression that the reader wants to read your work specifically, and not other titles that are out there. In terms of length, we would usually say about 70 to 90,000 words for a book monograph. Some come in longer than that. Maybe 120,000 words. I mean, that's usually as a publisher, our maximum level. And some edited collections can run to that if you were sort of editing a project. I think just be aware that with book length comes production and print cost, so that will add to the cost for the book, and therefore it will also have an impact on the price of the book as well, which may then sort of subsequently make it a more difficult sell. So all of these things have a knock-on effect. I think if you are going to include images, we're Intellect specifically is quite a visual publisher. So we do encourage images, but obviously that will have a knock-on effect for the length of the book. So bear that in mind. I think that a book of 120,000 words plus 200 images is going to be too long, unless there's sort of some funding for it. And then also think about, do the images need to be in color? And are you able to get permissions for those images, and third-party material? All those things, if you can show an awareness of that and sort of talk about it up front in the proposal, that's always really persuasive for us, that you're aware of all those, all those facets of publishing, really. And do mention any previously published material. Is it a PhD thesis? Which is fine if it is, but is the PhD available online anywhere? Is it, and sort of we need to know how much is going to be adapted and how much new original material will be added to it as well. And then with the writing plan, be realistic about timelines. As Mohammed said, again, book publishing is a matter of years and not months, so we're well aware that things take time, but do try to be realistic about when you think you're going to be able to submit things either for review or then for production. And that's sort of maybe the first half of the proposal form. The bit that I really want to mention is the bit that often gets skipped over, sort of frequently by potential authors. And it's the section on the audience and the section on comparable titles and marketing and readership. I think it's not the case that it's just the publisher's job to sort of promote and market the book. And we do see this as a collaboration. And we absolutely use the form at all stages of the book publication process. Then we pass it on to marketing, and it can be updated, of course. But if you can get that, if you can really think about that sort of at the same time as you're thinking about the book synopsis, that'd be really useful. And I think it's a great exercise for you as well in terms of thinking about publishing a book. So the first point I was going to make was to do with the comparable titles and competitor analysis. This is really useful for us. I think oftentimes this is deemed to be a trick question, as though like your book's not original if there are comps, comparable titles and competition out there, which is obviously not the case. I think there are very few books that are so original. There's no book that can be listed in a comparable titles section. So it just doesn't need to be a full survey of the literature. It can be sort of maybe 4 or 5 key titles of books that maybe you look up to, or books that you think your book is like, but that in certain key ways your book is different. And that will help to tease out how original your book is, because we take it, as read that there are other books out there, but how is your book different? Sort of why is your book necessary, and what's different about yours in relation to those books? That list also will then get sent, if we do accept the book for publication, that list then gets sent to our sales reps and is then used as, sort of evidence of what else is out there. But if they will check that against ISBNs of books that they might, we can run the ISBNs through sort of Nielsen book data and find out how well those books did. And then that gives us a sense of how well your book potentially might do. And sales reps might get more excited about a book if there are ISBNs attached to it of similar titles that have done well. So it can actually work in your favor to give that some thought. The audience section, obviously we really need to know, in your opinion, who this book is for, specifically which fields would be interested in this work. And again, because we're an interdisciplinary publisher, it can be, it can be quite a few different areas. And that's fine, it really is, but you just need to, because we would have access to a lot of different communities and sort of various conferences and how to cross over. But we need to know from you what you think the book is, where you think the book is relevant. So specific fields, we do even ask for specific suggestions of university courses where your work would be relevant. You're the expert in the field, and if you know sort of international courses where students and where it could even have sort of course adoption potential, really useful for us to know. And it seems like too much. I do understand that it often seems like too much information to be providing right at the start, and of course it can be updated once the book's been contracted and in production. But if you just engage with those questions early on, it just shows a willingness to collaborate again.
Tim, yes,
yeah.
One question that I have, I want to share a question that was shared, that has been shared by Amy, my colleague. Many of our colleagues here are practitioners, right? So how are the books that are written by practitioners for practitioners? So, Amy, do you want to, elaborate on this? Do you want to add more to this question?
I think you framed it really well. That's
Okay.
a great question.
So what's the question? Like how? in which-
Yeah, so because, I mean, if an architect, I mean, if there's an architect who wants to write a book for other architects, I mean, because most of this conversation that we are having is about the books that are being written for either students or scholars,
yeah.
right? But how about the professional audience? How would you, I mean, what's the difference in framing a book, a publication for that kind of audience?
We do publish quite a lot of practitioner work that isn't specifically based, around sort of, necessarily sort of academics or scholars producing that work. I think that again, we would just need to sort of have a conversation from the practitioners, about about sort of, whichever field it is, sort of a dance or architecture or music, whatever it is, kind of about how to find that specific audience for it, because it's not an unusual topic for us to sort of engage with. It's just finding, independent practitioners. We just need to know how we can work with your profile as a practitioner. We can certainly get it into sort of promote it and make it discoverable to other potential practitioners working in that area. So, there's a lot that can be done sort of outside of the course structure I was talking about, to sort of get it into the hands of the sort of discoverable by other practitioners. But I think we would need to work closely with sort of information like networks of practitioners. And sort of, again, it would be a collaboration, but certainly given with the fields that we publish in, there's lots and lots of people that are sort of both either academics and practitioners, or perhaps solely practitioners, that have brilliant ideas for books that would then be very useful for other practitioners and then potentially students as well, obviously. So, I mean, we absolutely encourage that. This needs to be a bit more of a conversation. And in terms of how the proposal would change, I mean, just as much information as possible, as always. And, it's a starting point for us anyway. The proposal is just a starting point. And if our interest was piqued by sort of the areas of the area that's been being practiced, then we would have a conversation about how we could try to make it work as a viable product and how we could find the audience. And then sometimes it does work. I've had lots of conversations with people, and sometimes it's just a bit more outside our comfort zone, perhaps, to sort of know that we could definitely reach the required number of sales within that area. So it might depend on the area as well.
And
Thanks.
Amy, I think most of the stuff that I covered in my part, I think they apply to all kinds of publications, whether your audience is professional or scholarly. It really doesn't matter. You still need to define the audience. You need to define the scope of the book.
Absolutely, yeah. No, I think these are just good rules, just generally, in order to get people to take your proposal seriously. So yeah, and that was, I mean, but it's a good question about sort of practice-based research or practitioners in general, because it's interesting material, and we would certainly encourage that. And quite often a lot of that could then have perhaps more crossover potential. So I know I was talking there a lot about sort of specifically books that we would pitch to a certain audience in the scholarly world. Or, if something came in and it was by an independent practitioner or researcher, or someone that's just got a profile, and the book seemed to have more potential for a wider interested audience, then we do publish those types of books as well. And it's always sort of exciting to engage with books that might get sort of thousands of readers rather than hundreds. And it's a very different model, and we need to be much more sure of ourselves when we to take on books like that. But we certainly wouldn't say no to it if it was more accessible or less scholarly.
Thank you so much, Tim. Any final questions for Tim?
I don't know if this is easy
Yeah.
to answer. In terms of, let's say you have a PhD dissertation and you're like, oh,
Yeah.
this is just ready to publish. I do have some colleagues who are perfecting 2 chapters for publishers instead of hitting the publisher with an entire dissertation that may not have been edited. Is that something you recommend, that you really put your best foot forward with a sample so that a publisher is, has a sense of what you want to do, and then you get into contract with this person and they write more? Or are you looking for an 80% document, fairly unpolished?
Is it specifically for a sort of a PhD thesis that would then be revised into a monograph?
In this instance, yes.
Yeah, I think again, a thorough proposal, sort of recognizing that that's that you are going to revise it, and then yes, I should have mentioned that actually. Sorry, sample chapters are really useful. So like 1 or 2 sample chapters to get a sense of the writing style and how it's sort of been changed perhaps for the book publication, and maybe not quite so heavy with citations or just the idea that the tone has been engaged, the different tone is being engaged with. I mean, and then with the samples and then the proposal, what often we've done in the past is then to get that reviewed for the emerging scholar or the sort of whoever it is, and get some feedback on how to then revise it further. Maybe you've only just started the project revising it and you'd like some help with that. So I'm working on a few projects where we're specifically providing that sort of role of trying to help people to develop their first book. And we're a small company, we have limited resources, but between us and people like Mohammed and our book series editors, there's lots of potential for advice and mentors out there that can help fashion a sort of a new book.
Thank you very much.
Quick question related to that. If it's not a PhD dissertation, where in the workflow do you actually submit that? Or when in the workflow do you submit that book proposal?
If it's right, okay, yeah.
It's your first time writing a book and you're so excited, do you write the whole thing and then do the book proposal? Or are you here's my
Yeah, it's I think that's an excellent question. That's an excellent question. Because, to a certain extent, some people just want to know if an idea is, got legs, and so that's why. So that's but that's why we'll receive sometimes, and I think that's fine. And just it depends if you've got contacts that can respond to that. So some publishers just might not respond to you if you send them an email and say, what about this idea? They may only respond to a full proposal. So I think you might have to just accept that things need to be thought through to a certain, to a relatively thorough extent. If you then want to get a positive response, but where that is in the timeline for I suppose only you can know. I think a sample chapter is great. If you've got an introduction and a sample chapter, that shows you're serious about it. If you've got a manuscript written because for whatever reason it's come out of some project that's been written up and you've revised it a little bit, or it's a previous thesis, then you can just send that in, but it doesn't really take the place of a proposal, in my opinion. People want to send in a manuscript, and I'll just say, can you send a proposal, because I can't read it, and then we just have to send it out. So I think wherever you are in the journey with the manuscript, you need to be far enough down it, certainly, that the proposal has kind of enough information, and then maybe. So yeah, it's a good question, because I think that there's no one answer, but I think the point is we would often get back to people and say there's not enough information here, but equally there might be enough information for us to know it's not for us. So you could send out a case of proposal, but it's more likely that we'll say there's not enough information here, or can you give us some sample chapters? You know, more and more it's like that rather than a straight yes. I think more and more there's a sort of process the proposal will go through rather than just getting back to you and saying, this sounds great, we'll publish it. You know, I think that it's the beginning of a conversation. So if you have missed things out, that's fine. But be aware you'll probably be asked for it at some point.
Thank you so much, team, for your time. I know this is slightly late your time, 7 p.m. I really appreciate you for joining us. It was amazing.
No problem. Thank you for inviting me. It's really nice to sort of.
I'm gonna share your email address with anyone who.
Well, that's what I'm here for. So yeah, please do.
Thanks so much. Take care.
Thank
Great.
you.
Thanks. Bye.
And by the way, just to give you a very rough idea about the number of kind of so-called rejections, out of kind of 25 proposals that you send out to publishers, only one of them is being seen or being taken seriously. So, because again, publishers, they have their own kind of priorities. I mean, for example, let's say publishers like MIT Press and Harvard University Press, they usually work within their own kind of network, so they normally don't get book proposals from outside world or other publishers. They may just accept proposals that align with their own kind of book series. So if they don't accept your book proposal, don't feel that there is something wrong with your work. So I'm just going to go over this one quickly. It's on the journal paper publication. You will find lots of overlaps with the earlier presentation because it's the same thing. So again, when it comes to publishing a journal paper publication, first of all, find the right topic. And again, it's all about your expertise. Some of us may feel that we need a PhD, we need some, expertise, we need some degree to publish a journal paper. It's not the case. So any one of us can write a journal paper, can publish a journal paper. We just need, and many of us already, you all have wonderful projects that you are working on, which can be easily turned into journal papers. And remember, again, it's all about patience. It will take 1 to 3 years to write and publish a journal paper. So you need to be patient. And sometimes, once you submit it to a journal, it gets rejected. You have to resubmit it again, which requires lots of kind of editing and revising the whole paper, and again, revising the whole citations, which is really time consuming. So, but this is it. So, but again, once the paper is out, you'll be happy. So who cares? Choose the right audience and venue for your research. For example, for the NIH project that I recently did, I had the option of publishing my work, one of the papers, in an architectural journal or a public health journal. And then I decided to proceed with a public health journal. And that was definitely intentional because I wanted to reach out to that audience. And again, it's up to us what kind of audience we want to target. Start with a nice structure and abstract. Again, this is all about structure. So if you have any ideas about something that you have been teaching in your classroom, a project that you have been working on, something that you built a couple of years ago, a nice pedagogy project or anything like this, you can come up with a nice outline and you can start from there. Find the right journal. Again, academic credibility of the journal. There are lots of fake journals out there and they never help because in academia some people may go with easy publications because they may feel that it just is easier, but it never helps any tenure cases. It even harms, unfortunately, faculty members. And sometimes it's just because we may not be necessarily familiar with that journal, but they never go well. The peer review process is very important. It never makes me happy when I don't get good, detailed reviews from a publisher. It's not a good sign. So I expect to get rigorous, even negative reviews from the publisher, because it helps me revise the paper. It's a learning opportunity for me, even though it adds to my workload. So the publication quality is really important. So pay close attention to that one. And publication timeline is important. For example, in the case of our journal, because of this backlog of papers, we have, anyone who is submitting a paper, they have to wait for almost 3 years. So anyone who is going for tenure, probably that's not the right venue for them to consider, right? So that's why you need to think, sometimes you need to contact the editor in advance and ask them, what's your timeline? And also the peer review process takes a long time. Sometimes then it may take them 7 to 8 months to tell you that this is not a proper paper for their journal. And this is all wasted time for you. So use the right language and structure and citation style. So what does right language mean? Again, talking about that public health journal, using that public health language. So if my language should change depending on the journal, the venue that I'm submitting to, the structure, and usually actually journals, they have their own kind of outline that I should follow. They have their own citation style. And I should say that, for example, in the case of our journal, when I receive a paper that does not follow our citation style, normally we tend to reject them upfront. We don't even read them. Why? Because we say if they are not even willing to revise the paper and submit it based on our style, we probably don't care much about, spending time sending it to 3 reviewers and investing so much into these papers. Because remember that you may feel that this is so much investment on your side, it's much more of an investment on the journal side and the editors. Ask your colleagues to read your paper and share their feedback before submitting it to a journal, because getting their feedback is going to be helpful. And please ask them not to be nice to you, because give it to colleagues who are being critical, or they have the reputation of being a little bit kind of not very easygoing. So that really helps. Ask a copy editor to edit your paper. Again, make sure that the paper that you are submitting is in perfect shape when it's being submitted. Carefully revise the paper based on submission guidelines. Read it carefully, read the submission guidelines carefully, and then submit it. And again, I know this is the last stage of submission, which is really time consuming, especially if you are doing it for the 3rd time and the 4th time after submitting it to getting rejection from a few other journals. Expect several rejections and prepare for resubmissions before publication. This is very normal. It happens to all of us. I can tell you that this is, again, part of the process. Read the reviews carefully and don't take rejections, personally. So what does it mean? It means that you need to just read them, you need to address them, and what happens is that in your document, you need to actually, you need to come up with a document, a response document, in which you are saying, all these 25 comments that I have received, this is how I'm addressing them. And I can imagine how organized Brit is going to be in answering their feedback. So I'm sure that all of you, based on the work that you have done, even it could be based on the pedagogy projects that you have done. For example, Brit, the work that you have done in 300 as an experience, as a process, you can come up with a journal paper that could be very appropriate for a journal. For example, the Journal of Architectural Education is exactly the one that is interested in all these experiments that we are doing at the School of Architecture and Planning and Preservation. So any general questions before we start this part? And I know that, I don't know what's the plan for our colleagues who are online.
We can put them into rooms
Okay.
if they're able to stay. I'm just gonna go ahead and put a file in the chat, which is a resources file. So when Mohammed was talking about the publications, Cindy has a link that she gets from her Architectural Librarians Organization that goes through all of the journals that are typically used for accreditation purposes, and they're starred by peer review. So you can look through that list and look for journals and then go to that journal and read current examples as something to follow and learn from. And then I also gathered some resources about architectural research. So it's kind of a mishmash. I only put the abstracts for 3 of them in the sheet itself, but it links to a Google Doc, and there's more papers in there. Specifically, I was looking for, is there a paper out there about how practitioners can turn work that they've done that may be more hands-on or material-based into a peer-reviewed publication or scholarly publication? There is not a lot of information out there about that specific thing. There's more information about the need for dissemination. That part is very clear, that from many different organizations, they're saying, look, you guys have so much knowledge, we need to figure out how to get it to people in a faster and more streamlined manner.
But again, I think this is such an important point, that we still don't have guidelines for practice-related papers in our journal, because we aim to kind of make a bridge between practice and theory. We have a section that is called Design in Practice, and we work with practitioners, experts in preservation and restoration, to turn their work into papers. And I should say that we spend a lot of time kind of mentoring them to prepare these papers. And this is the part of the work that is very rewarding, because these are not the kind of typical people who turn their work into publications. But the other category, as I mentioned, is pedagogy, which is, I think, is quite underestimated. And there's a lot of innovation going on. I mean, Lindsay, in your administrative work, you have done lots of creative work, and I think some of that could be easily translated into journal papers, easily.
Tara,
And so,
who put up that comment?
what's that?
Who put up that comment?
Michelle
Oh,
did.
Great,
Yeah.
then I'll let Michelle explain. I was gonna say the same thing, this open access publishing supported by the dean. Thanks, Michelle.
And that link is in the resources
Yeah,
list.
I would just add there that through my service on the Library Council, I realized the extent to which open access publishing is a diversity, equity, and inclusion issue. It's not just that we want lots of people reading our work. And Dean Lim has been very, very active in that regard. It's a complicated process. It's a complicated issue, but basically University of Maryland is recommending that authors provide uncut manuscripts that can be published online if their publishers accept that. So if you can't actually publish an open access book or publish in an open access journal, there's a parallel system on Drum to provide this material open access. There's a lot of problems with it. And I think especially for those of us who work with visual materials, I've been very active in sort of representing our interests and needs as people working with images and buildings. But it's just something to keep in mind.
Yeah, thanks for mentioning it, Michelle. I think the other challenge, and you mentioned that there are lots of challenges. One of the main challenges is actually the funding, because you want to publish an open access, journal paper, and I just recently published one, but I had to raise almost $3,000 to make it open access. So it's a very expensive business.
it's expensive, but it's also clearly the direction that many universities, including the leading universities in the country, are going. So there's a big push. There's also a fund to assist open access publishing. So I'm actually exploring the possibility of working with Rutledge to possibly convert both my book and Juan's book into open access. And the librarian, Dean of Libraries, is talking about possibly providing us assistance in acquiring copyright permissions for open access, which has to be done a second time. So that's one thing to just keep in mind, is that when you're publishing a book for the first time, instead of having to go through permissions twice, once for the print publication, ebook publication, and a second time for a future conversion to open access, one might be able to do this all at once. So.
Thank you.
And just a reminder about the new seed grant that came out, there is a level that specifically designates
Yeah.
potential funding for people who want to do this, up to $2,500.
Thank you, Tara.
That's April 3rd. Not necessarily open access, but the whole process,
Yes,
so
yeah.
it could include that. And I'm trying to think if there was a note that came out from libraries for funding that's always available about this. Yeah, the Open Access Publishing Fund. So the information for that, in my email signature line is the Research and Info Hub. And all the way down under funding, always open, is a blurb about that. So,
And that's in your email, Tara, is that right?
yeah, you can get to the Research and Information Hub through my email signature line.
Great, thank you.
The hyperlink to that, yeah.
And sorry I have to jump off, but thank you for this.
Thank you.
Great. So I'm gonna go ahead and stop recording as we go
Sure.
into the hands-on